New Orleans Saints playmakers Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave among the top 100 players going into the 2025 NFL season. And that's not just my opinion. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I'm going to tell you who I think could make the NFL's top 100 players list next year, players that are maybe just a year away for the New Orleans Saints. I'll tell you why Erik McCoy was absolutely robbed when it comes to our Locked On NFL top 100 players. But we're going to start everything off with the guys that actually made Locked On's list, Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave, and I'll tell you why both playmakers absolutely deserve their placement on Locked On's top 100. We got all that and much more for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen, being an everydayer, and checking out the show here, which is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets. All you got to do is win your first $5 bet. Head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Chris Olave, wide receiver, fourth-year wide receiver, as well as Alvin Kamara, the star running back for the New Orleans Saints, both land on Locked On's top 100 players list for 2025, and they absolutely deserve the placement. And that's where we're going to start everything off today. The Locked On Podcast Network, which I am proudly a part of course, put out our first ever list of top 100 players. You can find that. I'll have a link in the description for an article that you can go to that'll have that listed out. You can also find the special actually covering and kind of discussing some of these rankings over at Locked On Sports Today, one of our national flagship shows. But I wanted to start off here taking a look at the two players that actually made the list for the New Orleans Saints in 2025 or going into 2025. That is Alvin Kamara, who is the number 49 player on the list, as well as number 83 wide receiver Chris Olave. So those two players are the only two New Orleans Saints players to make the list of the top 100 players going into 2025. I think they deserve their placement, and I certainly think they deserved at least consideration and conversation. We'll go into some of the snubs and some of the players that I think are maybe a year away a little bit later on, but I want to discuss why I think Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave do belong and deserve their placement on this list. Let's start with Alvin Kamara, because Alvin Kamara didn't have a shortened 2025, or well, 2024. He actually did. He missed the last 3 games of the season, but didn't have a shortened season like Chris Olave did. And so that creates a little bit more controversy around the Chris Olave selection. But Alvin Kamara as a top 50 player in the NFL, I think makes sense. Why? Look, this is a guy that is just getting better and better every year. I know that he has had some quote unquote down years for his standard over the course of the not last year, but the couple years before that. But I'm just going to be honest. I think all of that had a lot to do with Pete Carmichael more than it had to do with Alvin Kamara. And it had a lot to do with roster management and roster building more than it had to do with Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara has been at his best, absolute best, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and then even really going into 2021. But particularly those first 4 years when he has had or been able to be a complement in a committee, right? Not necessarily be the workhorse or be the lead back in those types of situations where he's the one that's running between the tackles and trying to run outside and trying to be involved in the passing game. He has been at his best when he has been able to be out in space, been able to be a change of pace back, be a guy that can be utilized as a receiver, utilized outside the tackles, all those other things. And he finally got his opportunity to get back to that kind of play style last year in Clint Kubiak's wide zone offense, which altogether wasn't massively successful. After all, Clint Kubiak was a one and done. It helps that the Saints, of course, keyed in or focused in on Kellen Moore very early in their hiring process when it came to rehiring their next head coach or hiring their next head coach. And so they knew pretty much that they had the goal of going the offensive head coach route. So maybe that factored in a little bit to Clint Kubiak's departure. But with Clint Kubiak going on to Seattle, it at least shows you that the Saints weren't necessarily in position to say, you know what, we really like what we've gotten in this situation, right? We can't let this go. Can't let that guy walk, whatever it might be. But the thing that Clint Kubiak did the best of any offensive play caller for New Orleans since Sean Payton, there's only been two, but since Sean Payton, was get the most out of Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara, career high 900 or nearly got to that first 1,000-yard rushing season, had 950 rushing yards last year, and the Saints ran a lot outside the tackles. 69.8% of their rushes went out there. That was league leading to the outside. And so it was a perfect way to utilize Alvin Kamara, all of that. And remember, the play that Alvin Kamara got hurt on that cost him the rest of his season was a touchdown catch from wide receiver Cedric Wilson Jr. We kind of broke a little bit of his performance down in yesterday's episode as we were previewing the running back room going into training camp. But I think looking ahead, the reason why it's easy to say that Alvin Kamara is a top 100 player, and even in this case, a top 50 player in the NFL going into 2025, is because of the remarkable amount of talent that he has, his ability to be able to impact the game in multiple different areas of that game, right? Receiver as well as a rusher. Will always be vying for passing attempts too, but I don't think he's going to see those. And on top of that, now walks into 2025 as what is effectively going to be, as my good friend Peter Bukowski put it over at Locked On Sports today, the heartbeat of the New Orleans Saints offense. I think that's very true. I think that this team will want to throw the football. I think that this team will implement more RPOs. I think that this team will absolutely be willing to trust whichever young quarterback is its starter at any point throughout the season. And also will rely on its receivers and its tight ends and its pass catchers and all that. But I do think that this offense will begin and end with Alvin Kamara as the heartbeat of that offense. And maybe some other running back gets their breakout opportunity here in 2025 and, becomes that complement to Alvin Kamara, which helps to bolster a little bit of what Alvin Kamara does. But I am firm on my idea here that Alvin Kamara will be a 1,000-yard rusher in 2025. Maybe it's a bold prediction, but that's the way that I feel. And I think he will still be a vital part of the passing game as a safety outlet for that young quarterback, whichever one is starting at any given time. And so I think that for Alvin Kamara, he has the opportunity to continue to even take steps forward from the already explosive and dynamic player that he is. We saw the 57-yard catch and run on a screen pass week 2 last year up against the Dallas Cowboys. That was vintage Alvin Kamara. But here's the thing. It's not vintage Alvin Kamara. It's just Alvin Kamara. And that is still very much in his wheelhouse and his ability to be able to impact a football game. As for Chris Olave, I think that people at Locked On and people where, this list has already made kind of the rounds, were shocked by the fact that Chris Olave was on the list at number 83 and was not just above players with better production in 2025 in Jerry Jeudy, the wide receiver from the Cleveland Browns, but also Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver from the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had a 1,000-yard season his rookie year. While I understand that, not only was he ahead of them, those guys weren't on the list at all, period, which I think was a glaring oversight by my great colleagues here at Locked On. Just because I work here doesn't mean I have to like the list, right? And so I think that's a conversation in and of itself, that Jerry Jeudy and Brian Thomas Jr. should be on the list, but I don't think that Chris Olave being on the list and them not being on the list is the issue. Chris Olave absolutely deserves to be on this list. And at 83, it makes sense. A really promising start to his career. The first 2 seasons, 1,000-yard receiving seasons, 4 touchdowns his first year, 5 touchdowns his second year. But last year had the concussion concerns. Only had 400 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown as well. But going into 2025, if he stays healthy, there's no doubt that he's a top 100 player in the NFL. And not only will that be the case because he is talented, but because he, like Alvin Kamara, will be a focal point of this offense, and he would be the focal point of the passing offense in particular. And so that's why I think both of these guys, Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave, absolutely deserve their placements, 49 and 83 respectively, on Locked On's Top 100. But this list has at least one glaring omission from a New Orleans Saints uniform, and that's center Erik McCoy, who might be the best player at his position in the league. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And while you can't bet on the Locked On NFL Top 100, I'm sorry, you can bet on Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Chris Olave has odds for Comeback Player of the Year. Alvin Kamara is on the list for Offensive Player of the Year as well. They are long odds for both players, but it is something you can get in on. And of course, if you're a first-time customer, all you got to do is put $5 down. If you win your first $5 bet, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. So go and find a heavy favorite somewhere, something with short odds. Put your first $5 down on that. If you win, you get 30-1 odds on that because you're getting $150 in bonus bets on top of your winnings. It's a great way to get started over at FanDuel today. There's also new deals every single week, oftentimes daily deals as well that you can get in on. So go and check them out today. Get $150 in bonus bets by winning your first $5 bet by opening up the FanDuel app today or heading over to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, family. I love my colleagues here at Locked On, and in particular amongst the Locked On NFL personnel that I work very closely with and work very closely for. However, it doesn't mean that they're all perfect. And I think that that became a glaring, obvious piece of information when there was a glaring, obvious omission to the NFL Top 100 and center Erik McCoy. This to me tells you two things. Number one, my Locked On colleagues are far from perfect. They're not perfect. It's okay. We'll all be fine. Everything's okay. The second thing that it tells you is that media tends to undervalue good offensive line play. The New Orleans Saints got off to a nearly historic 91.2-game win streak to open up the season. Erik McCoy got hurt week 3 early on in the game up against the Philadelphia Eagles, and the New Orleans Saints' entire offense fell apart, and the Saints themselves went on a 7-game losing streak. Now, did they go on the 7-game losing streak because Erik McCoy was not on the field? No, there were other pieces to that, right? Eventually, they had to try different quarterbacks. They had more injuries on the interior offensive line. They had injuries on defense. They would eventually carry injuries beginning week 6 or so at wide receiver. That ended up cutting them short in terms of their ability to produce, particularly in the downfield game, losing Rashid Shaheed week 6, losing Chris Olave week 8. Like, it didn't go great, right? None of it went great for the New Orleans Saints from that case. But it all started with the loss of Erik McCoy, and the Saints did not win without Erik McCoy. And so I think one of the things or one of the biggest kind of omissions from this list, so we talked about Jerry Jeudy, we talked about Brian Thomas Jr., but one of my other big omissions from this list is Erik McCoy, who clearly is incredibly valuable to the New Orleans Saints, but beyond that is one of the better centers in the NFL and has been for quite some time, consistently highly ranked as a highly graded offensive lineman, does not allow a lot of pressures, does not surrender a lot of sacks, is outstanding in the run game, is a great leader on the offensive line as well. I think that the biggest omission from this list from a New Orleans Saints uniform was Erik McCoy. Erik McCoy is easily one of the best players at his position, perhaps the best player in the league at his position now that Jason Kelce's gone, and therefore is one of the best 100 players in the NFL. And him not being on this list just kind of makes me shake my head a little bit. You know what I mean? Makes me want to make some phone calls, be like, why didn't you vote for Erik McCoy? And then figure all this out, because to me, it's so preposterous that a player that is one of the best, and if he's not number 1, he ain't number 3 or below at the position when it comes to center. Shocker to me that somebody as good at his individual position as he is, and really along the offensive line, like he's an anchor for this New Orleans Saints team, that he would not be considered a top 100 player. So for me, that is the biggest and most glaring omission from when it comes to a New Orleans Saints uniform on this list. Another player that didn't make the list that is a little bit of a surprise to me is linebacker Demario Davis. I know Demario Davis didn't have his strongest season in 2024 is the argument that a lot of people would make. I get that. But we're talking about him moving into 2025. We're talking about his new defensive scheme, right? I would say the same thing about Erik McCoy. Yeah, Erik McCoy missed games last year, but despite all the games that he missed, he still got voted in as a Pro Bowler, which shows you the difference between when players and coaches are voting for things versus when media is voting for things and stuff like that. But the other thing on top of that is you're looking at going into the 2025 season. So we're assuming everyone's going to be healthy, right? Like that's kind of the game we have to play here, right? Like the number one player in the league could be the number one player in the league going into 2025 with the assumption that they're healthy. But if they're not healthy, they won't be the number one player in the league. By the way, our number one player in the league was Lamar Jackson, Baltimore Ravens quarterback, the right call by our Locked On experts here. So for Erik McCoy and for Demario Davis, you're looking at going into 2025. Right? It's why the inclusion of Chris Olave to me was so kind of surprising in a good way, is because it was like, oh, okay, there's some foresight being applied here, right? It's not just about the fact that he dealt with concussions and head injuries last year. It's about what can he be going into 2025 in a new offense and being the focal point of the Kellen Moore passing game and all these other pieces. And so for me, looking at Demario Davis, looking at Erik McCoy, both these guys should have been on the list for the same reason. You're projecting health and you're projecting them going into 2025. I think what it is with Demario Davis is that everyone's still waiting for him to fall off of a cliff. And I got news for you. Demario Davis is not the type of player that falls off of a cliff. Is there a chance that he's less effective at a later point in his career than he was early on in his career? Yes. But this is a guy that has aged like a fine wine from the very beginning, right? He's out there being an ambassador, going to France and doing all this really cool stuff and everything like that. But outside of that, or really not outside of that, but beyond that, the work that he puts in to his recovery, the work that he puts in to taking care of his body, if you haven't seen the New Orleans.football exclusive, kind of covering his process and everything like that, it's amazing. And to see what it is that he does, it's remarkable in terms of the way that he keeps himself not just on the field, but impactful on the field, which I think is one of the things that makes him a top 100 player. Longevity should count for something. And longevity is like the synonym of the name Demario Davis. Like that's very much a part of what it is that he does. But beyond just being a synonym of his name and being a guy that stays on the field, his production matches all of it as well. Demario Davis hit his career high in sacks 3 seasons ago when he had 6.5 sacks back in 2022. He followed that up in 2023 with another 6.5 sack season. So his 2 best seasons as a pass rusher, not that he was a full-time pass rusher, but just being utilized sparingly in that element of the game, came in 2 of the last 3 seasons. Last year, he missed 1 game, but still put together over 136 total tackles for the New Orleans Saints as well. He's had at least 100 tackles every single season that he's been around. He's had several pressures. He's been a consistent nuisance in the backfield. You look at the tackles for a loss as well. He's been in double digits every year except for last year. And then so now you move him into this year where he's got a new defensive system. He's going to have a clearer set of responsibilities as an inside linebacker and a 3-4 defense. Like it's going to be a little bit of a shift for him, but he's going to do great in that scenario. And of course, the leadership. The leadership is the other part of all this, just like I highlighted with Erik McCoy. And maybe this is something we don't really take into consideration when it comes to top 100 player evaluations. I know I certainly did when I went through and I did my personal rankings, right? We all submitted and then you get like an aggregation of that. And that's what creates your top 100. And I think leadership's got to count for something. I think his ability to stay on the field has to account for something. I think his ability to remain productive when he is on the field, despite his age, right? He's going into his, age 36 season now, and we're still talking about him as one of the best off-ball linebackers in the NFL. Absolutely no doubt about it. So for me, those were the 2 glaring omissions, Demario Davis and Erik McCoy, but I'm glad to see Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave on the list. Now, there are a few other players that I think are really just a year away from landing on this list, and 2 of them are over on the New Orleans Saints defensive side, Alontae Taylor and Chase Young. But there are some others as well. Let's break them all down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. There are a few New Orleans Saints players that are maybe just a year away from being NFL top 100 players in the league. And so I wanted to take a look at some of those guys that might just be on the 2026 list as opposed to 2025 list with a good performance here in 2025. This is what I love about like us doing this list on our own. Like, there's a lot of times where like some folks will do, some outlets will do like a top 100 list and everybody just has to pretend it's perfect. I like that we've been able to kind of be given the freedom to come here and be like, wow, this is stupid. And so it's been a lot of fun to kind of like bicker back and forth with the other hosts and everything. And so one of the things that we kind of started talking about in like our group chats and everything like that is like, who's a year away, right? Like who's almost there and needs like a really good year. And I think there are two players in particular, and I'm going to name a couple of bonus guys, but there are two players in particular that I think like one good year here in New Orleans, and then all of a sudden they're on this list for next year. The number one guy is Alontae Taylor. The number two guy is Chase Young. Alontae Taylor has everything in line for him to have I want to be careful about how I say this, a Jalen Ramsey-like reboundy trajectory. I don't think that Alontae Taylor is necessarily in the need for a rebound. He's a really talented player. The issue is that he's been moved around all over the place, and now you got to do this, and now you got to do this, and now you got to do this, and now you got to do this. And so him being able to finally just focus in on something, I think will give him the opportunity to be able to put himself on the map. Let's say it that way. Like he's going to have this opportunity to have sort of this Jalen Ramsey, I'm on the map now kind of year. Just like Jalen Ramsey had under Brandon Staley back with the Los Angeles Rams. Remember, Jalen Ramsey didn't do that by having like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 interceptions. He had an interception that year, but he was so effective in that star role in 2020 and under Brandon Staley and all that other stuff that I look at Alontae Taylor and his skill set, his tenacity, his attitude, his confidence, his short-term memory, all of those things. And also, by the way, like his sheer ability to make plays on a football field in a multitude of different ways, rushing the passer, getting involved in the run game, coverage, so on and so forth, tackling, all that. And it just feels like he has been finally set into sort of this trajectory or place where he can just fully realize his talent. And so I'm really excited to see what he'll be able to do in 2025. And I do believe that with a solid 2025 season, he can be on this list next year. Another player that makes a lot of sense here, Chase Young. You'll notice that I'm picking two players that are coming from premier positions, cornerback, edge rusher, because everyone sees them, everyone watches them, their names get called when they do good things and their names don't get called when they do bad things, right? So like, it's not just a situation where like Erik McCoy, you really only hear his name if something goes wrong at center, right? Offensive lineman, you only hear their names if something goes wrong on the offensive line. And so hearing the name is part of what gets you recognized for lists like this. But hearing the name in some cases only happens when something doesn't go right. That's not the case for cornerback and edge rusher. You get the interceptions, you get the pass breakups, you get the sacks, you get the pass rushes, you get the tackles for a loss, you get the forced fumbles, all this other stuff, right? And so I think that both of those guys can stand to benefit from this and are going to be walking into a system that will maximize what it is that they do, or at least put the players in position to maximize what it is that they do. And Chase Young falls into that category. His ability to be able to be a stand-up edge rusher in Brandon Staley's defense, not 100% of the time, but I'm sure it's what he'll do most of the time, and work off of his athleticism, work off of his tenacity, work off of the effort that he brought last year and build upon that, as well as work off of the athleticism and speed that he has. I think that all of that puts him in positions where if he has a 10.5 sack season, right, gets into that double-digit category, then all of a sudden he's a top 100 player. So those are two players that I would say with strong 2025 performances. Next year, when we're doing this show again, hopefully in June, we'll definitely be talking about both of those players if they have strong performances here in 2025. A couple of other players that I will highlight. Let's talk about the quarterbacks for a second, right? There's only one second-year quarterback on the list this year for us here at Locked On. That's Jaden Daniels, and he absolutely deserves to be there because he had an incredible rookie season. Does Tyler Shuck have to have that level of a rookie season to get on that list in 2026? Probably, but he does have the aid of being a quarterback. So if he starts all 17 games and looks good or better than good, he could work his way in there because of the positional value. Similar situation for Spencer Rattler. The only third-year quarterback on this list, player going into their third year, is CJ Stroud. He did not have the strongest season last year. In fact, he had a down year in his second year from his first year. So Spencer Rattler starts 17 games and then all of a sudden performs better than adequate, right? Performs better than good, then all of a sudden he's probably on this list. And so I think the quarterback value and the positional value aids both quarterbacks if they have better than adequate performances, their rookie or third year or rather second year situations here. So we'll see where things go for both of these players. But I do think that these are guys that could find their way back onto the list. In Spencer Rattler's case, going into his third year, just like CJ Stroud did, going into his second year, like Tyler Shuck, just like Jaden Daniels did here. Another couple of players that I would highlight, Kool-Aid McKinstry, for a lot of the same reasons that I highlighted Alontae Taylor, as being a guy that goes out there and is going to play in a system that's familiar to him and that's going to put him in position to succeed in that sort of zone match defense, the language that he understands and the system that he's played in under Nick Saban of all people during his collegiate years. I think that that's a good setup for him. And again, plays that cornerback position where your name gets called when you do good things. And so I think that that's another reason why I absolutely put Kool-Aid McKinstry up there. And I'm really curious about Justin Reed. Justin Reed got votes. So did Tyrann Mathieu in this list, along with guys like Taliese Fuanga going into his second year. Cameron Jordan got votes as well. So there were other players in here that did get votes, Erik McCoy and Demario Davis included, but didn't make the top 100. Justin Reed was one of those guys. And so if Justin Reed fits in and plays this sort of dynamic safety role, he could potentially find his way to the 2026 top 100 list. All right, so there you go. It's our coverage of the top 100 list. We'll kind of be working off of this for the next couple days as well. But tomorrow, I want to dive back into our camp previews and start looking ahead to that very same position that Justin Reed plays, safety. We got that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always. Make this part of your day, part of your routine for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.